Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down complex topics using the source material itself. Today, we're not talking about tanks or treaties to understand the war in Ukraine. Nope, we're looking at something totally different, a prophecy, but one written in the language of geometry. Okay, let's dive in. So, we're looking at a really unconventional analysis of this war. It uses a predictive model that pretty much ignores traditional military metrics. Instead, it's trying to forecast an end state based on the psychological and structural energy of the leaders themselves, almost like it's a law of physics. And this model comes up with a pretty startling prediction. By the end of 2026, the war is going to reach a physical freeze, not because of a treaty, but because of mutual total exhaustion. So the big question is, how on earth does a mathematical model arrive at a conclusion that specific and that dramatic? Well, the answer is in the tool itself. To really get the prediction, we first have to understand the model, and it's a unique way of mapping out the whole geometry of leadership. It's a theory called, geometric structure theory, and it tries to actually quantify a leader's decision-making. It looks at everything from their public statements to their policies and maps their core drivers and internal conflicts onto this kind of mathematical blueprint. So let's break down the 4 key pieces it uses. All right, first up, we've got authority. Think of this as a leader's formal power. Their official title, their command over the military, their control over all the levers of government. Second is intellect. And this isn't about being book smart or having a high IQ. It's more about strategic thinking, real-world skills, and just the raw ability to get stuff done. Third, we have wealth. This one's pretty straightforward, right? It's all the economic and material resources a leader has at their disposal, from the national bank all the way down to factories and supplies. And finally, reputation, which you can also think of as ideology. This is the more intangible stuff. The core beliefs, the public image, the whole national story a leader is trying to tell. And the model's big idea is that the way these 4 things push and pull against each other, well, that defines everything a leader does. All right, so now let's actually apply this thing. We're going to start by looking at President Zelensky's profile, but specifically before the full-scale invasion kicked off in 2022. So the model basically saw him as a pragmatic manager back then. You can see his main driver was using his intellect, his skills, to create wealth or tangible economic value. But check out that core conflict, authority versus intellect. That's a huge clash, showing his creative, problem-solving side was constantly bumping up against rigid government systems. And his ideology? Pretty much on the back burner. But then, February 2022 happens, and the data shows this radical, almost violent transformation in his entire leadership structure. I mean, his whole internal operating system just flips. The practical manager is gone. Now the model shows his new driving force is using reputation, that national story, to build up his wartime authority. It's a complete 180. And this number right here, this shows you the incredible price of that decision. The model calculates a nearly 1780-degree opposition between his reputation and the country's wealth. Now, think about that. 180 degrees is a perfect direct conflict. He was basically making a choice where every ounce of energy put into strengthening national identity came at the direct, almost total expense of the nation's material resources. Okay, so the model takes this completely transformed structure and projects it forward. And what it predicts for 2026 is a year of just wild, almost unbelievable extremes for him. I mean, look at this timeline. The year is just an absolute roller coaster. In the spring, a massive political crisis. By summer, his administrative power basically collapses. But at the same time, his personal strategic brain hits a godlike peak. And then in the fall and winter, a total system reboot that lets him get back in control. Just wild. Okay, let's zoom in on that summer crisis, because this is nuts. The model puts the risk to his authority, that's the big bar, at a whopping 131.5. while his actual achievement on that same axis just tanks down to around 45. The whole system is basically short-circuiting. The model even calls it administrative shock. But, and this is the crazy part, at the exact same time his formal power is collapsing, his personal intellect is peaking. It hits a score over 103, which is a level the model literally calls godlike. So what does this suggest? It suggests he's navigating this insane crisis through sheer personal brilliance, even as the state apparatus around him is failing. So how does all this turmoil lead back to that original prediction, the physical freeze? Well, to see that, we have to look at the final numbers for the end of 2026. Okay, so now we bring Putin back into the picture for the final comparison. By the end of 2026, the model says both leaders have pretty much burned out their strategic genius. They're back to being administrators. But, and this is the key difference, look at the wealth access. Zelensky's system has found a kind of balance. Achievement is higher than risk. Putin, on the other hand, is still running at a loss, burning more resources than he's actually gaining. And that is the result. This is the physical freeze. It's not a peace deal, it's not a victory parade. The model describes it as a forced stop, one based purely on the math of exhaustion. You have one side that doesn't have the money to keep attacking, and another that doesn't have the political capital to keep gambling. Yeah, and this summary from the source material just nails that final weary state. Putin held on to his historical status but burned his treasury. Zelensky held on to his administrative system but wore down his heroic halo. It's just two depleted structures that have hit their absolute mathematical limits. So at the end of the day, what this analysis leaves us with is a really fascinating, if kind of chillingly abstract way to look at conflict. And it leaves us with this big provocative question. Can a model like this truly predict the end of a war? Or is it just giving us a new language to understand its incredible human cost? Thanks for joining this explainer.